children on this Mothering Sunday, so I had expected we might be fewer, but actually we are a good number. Thank you. But that's mainly, well, it is because Peter is going to give such a very interesting talk and lead such an interesting discussion, which is really important. It's not only topical, it's a really crucial social issue of our time, assisted dying. So to have someone with Peter's experience, Peter, just tell us your medical background. Just give us just context, so that we've got that as well, because not everyone will know you as well as Cathy knows you, for instance.
Thank you very much. Oh, that is.
Bit of adjustment going on at the back there as well. Okay.
I think, yeah, well, I'm...
You're not doing the whole talk now, you're just starting it off.
Yeah.
Okay,
I was a physician in Darlington for... I need to turn myself... Can someone turn me down a bit at the back? It's... I'm lapel 1. Good, thank you very much. I was a physician in Darlington for 35 years, and before that I worked in London at various hospitals there, and I tried to retire when I was 67, but then COVID came along and I was dragged back and worked in Bishop Auckland for a year and a half as the only doctor there, so it was a bit of a shock really, sleeping on call. And of course, COVID was fairly rampant. It was supposed to be a COVID-free hospital, but it wasn't. And then after that, I spent a year and a bit vaccinating people at Leyburn, which was enormously rewarding, enormously interesting. It was, some people have survived it. And it was just so nice having 5 minutes to talk to people, take their history, where are you? And it was a great time. And I'm still involved a little bit with medicine. I work for an organisation called Doctors for the NHS, which tries to support the founding principles of the NHS. Not very successfully at the moment, I'm afraid, but we try and keep it free at the point of use, available for all, and we try and push away big businesses who are wanting to swamp general practice and hospital medicine. So that's my background, and like any doctor, I have over the years dealt with huge numbers of people, very sadly, who've been dying or who may want to die or have tried to kill themselves and so on. So that's my background.
Peter, thank you very much. That shows why we're so lucky to have you in this congregation and to have you here this afternoon. Thank you. I thought I would just read a little bit from Psalm 139 as another piece of context, because this is just a wonderful psalm about how God knows us through and through from the very point of origin and in our deepest reality, that God's knowledge of us is the knowledge of Father, Creator, and Redeemer. It's just a few words from Psalm 139, not the whole thing. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high that I cannot attain it. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! I try to count them. They're more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We thank you that we are made in your image. We thank you that in Christ we are redeemed in that same image. So help us to apply these thoughts and this background to this complex social issue we have today, that we may know we are special, unique, infinitely known and loved, and yet in a world that has endings which can be traumatic. So, Lord, we ask for wisdom and grace as we think about these things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Peter will give us a PowerPoint for 25 minutes or so, and then we can discuss, raise questions with each other and with Peter, and see where we go. So, Peter, I'm leaving the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be here. It's a great honour to be here, really. We're talking about really a very, very contentious subject about which people have very strong views for and against, and this just shows the sort of banners we see outside Parliament. Let us choose dignity, a very difficult word, dignity in dying, or sisters to live, not die. So I'm going to touch on the various issues relating to this argument. My views will probably become apparent during the discussion, but I don't want to preempt anything as we go along. So what we're talking about is a bill which is currently stuck in the House of Lords, I'm pleased to say, which is to allow adults who are terminally ill, this is an important phrase, subject to safeguards and protections, to request and to be provided with assistance to die. Now, the terminology is actually quite important here. This is the bill. Terminally ill adults who are anticipated to have less than 6 months to live. And I'd like to ask you, just sort of start things going, a show of hands. It doesn't commit you at all. I believe, provided safeguards are met, the patient's doctor should be permitted to provide the means for the patient to end their own life, and that assisted dying should therefore be a right under UK law. People who agree with that? Yes, yes, yes. People who disagree? Yeah. People who don't know? Right, okay. Right, lots of people I've got to sort of try and sway you one way or the other. That's very interesting. So just a little bit of terminology first of all. We're talking about assisted dying here. This is people who are, that's so important. Okay. We'll come back to her. This is people who are terminally ill. The dying patient has to self-administer the drug. The doctor can't do it. You have to give it. He may set up a pump or something, which you can just press the button and give it, but you have to give it. It's provided by the doctor. That's different to assisted suicide, where you're not terminally ill. You may be ill, you may just be depressed, you may be in pain, and again, you're not dying, and the drug is provided by the doctor and self-administered. And that again is different to euthanasia, where a doctor administers the drug. Okay, an important difference. So the doctor is administering a drug which is going to end your life. You can say the doctor is responsible for your death, therefore it kills you. You can put it whatever way you like. Do you know who the most famous person this applied to? Who was killed by their doctor? Pardon? George V, quite right. Now, George V was killed by Lord Dawson of Penn so that he got in the morning papers rather than the evening papers. And this was only apparent when his memoirs are published after his death. But much worse than that, he tried to persuade Catherine Black, who was a lovely Irish sister who was looking after George V, he tried to persuade her to give the injection. She refused. And so Lord Dawson had to give it himself. So a good Irish girl, Catherine, refused to be accused of regicide. So there we are. Let's look at the current bill and discuss the safeguards that are there at the moment. 2 doctors must independently confirm the patient's eligibility criteria, that he or she has got mental capacity, and there must be 7 days between assessments, all sorts of detail here. It goes to review panel. Think how difficult it is to get a GP appointment. How much more difficult it is again to get a legal figure, a psychiatrist and a social worker to go together, but that's what's supposed to be happening. Reflection period, cooling off period of 14 days is required, which can be shortened if death is imminent, and the patient must make 2 separate witnessed and signed declarations of their risk to die. Sorry, am I on your way? Okay, the passage of the bill has been very slow and tortuous. It was a private member's bill put up by Kim Leadbeater, and because of that it was subject to all sorts of restraints and probably hasn't been assessed as well as it should be. It had its 3rd reading in June 25, when it had a majority of 314 to 291 votes, and that was a smaller majority than the previous reading had done, so people are being persuaded a little bit against it. It then went to the House of Lords, and following a record-breaking debate in September, 1,200 amendments were put up to the bill, and this is filibustering really, and in fact although some of the amendments are very sensible, some are sort of stupid really. There were a lot of things that hadn't been thought about in the House of Commons. For example, pregnancy. If you're pregnant, should you be allowed to have assisted dying? Well, the House of Lords wanted that put in. People said no, but then they said everyone must have a pregnancy test, male, female, over 75. So that was the sort of amendment that was going in, and was really put in, I think, just to slow things down. It is likely that the deadline is April the 24th, and Lord Faulkner and others have accepted that it probably won't ever go into law. It won't be passed by the House of Lords. So then there are 2 things that can happen. It can go back to the Parliament bill can be enacted, where the Commons have to debate exactly the same bill all over again, and it may or may not go through. If it does go through, then it is passed, or it'll just fail, and I think it'll probably just fail. There are more other things have come of more importance since then. Just a little bit of history. Here's one of the early proponents of assisted dying, Tony Nicholson. He was locked in with a brainstem stroke, and he wished to die. His lawyers applied for a High Court ruling to allow a doctor to give him a lethal dose of painkillers without being prosecuted. Interestingly, his wife said she would not give it, but he wanted the doctor to give it, which is an interesting thing. His lawyers lost. Tony, who had been fighting for this for months, gave up the fight, and a week later he died of pneumonia. So was this right or not? Noel Conway had motor neuron disease. This is a little bit later, less than 12 months to live, and he felt that the option of an assisted death should be available to me here in this country in my final 6 months of life. This is what I'm fighting for. It will bring immense peace of mind and allow me to live my life to the fullest, enjoying my final months with my loved ones until I decide the time is right for me to go. So that's what he wanted. It went all the way up to the High Court. It was actually judged on by Brenda Hale, and she said no. She said what I think many of us feel now, that Conway's proposed scheme was inadequate to protect, if it was universal, to protect the weak and vulnerable, and failed to give enough weight to the significance of the sanctity of life and to the scheme's potential to undermine trust and confidence as between doctors and patients. He interestingly survived another 4 years after this ruling, and he eventually killed himself just by disconnecting his tube. Now, there's nothing to stop anyone doing that. Suicide was ruled legal in 1961. It is extraordinary that before then, attempted suicide, you'd be put in prison. If you'd failed, you'd go to prison. It's quite amazing, isn't it, really, how things have changed. So he committed suicide, essentially, but he did it himself. The doctor didn't do it. The doctor wasn't involved. So the question is, should assisted death in any form be legalized in the UK? Lots of arguments for, lots of arguments against. It is legal in one form or another in these countries, and legality has progressed in the Isle of Man, Jersey, and Scotland. Will be decided on Tuesday. The bill, the final reading of the bill is this Tuesday. We'll come to Scotland in a moment. UK law, the 1961 Suicide Act, says that anyone who commit an offence if they encourage or assist the suicide or attempted suicide of another person. If indicted, maximum 14 years in prison. But that requires the consent of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and no family member of the 400-odd Britons who've gone to Dignitas with the help of their family have ever actually been prosecuted, but some have been charged and have waited some months before the charge has been dropped. So messy. Those in favour of changing the law argue that 80% of the population say assisted suicide should happen. Whether everyone's thought through it in quite the detail that you may have to, I don't know. Provided sufficient safeguards are in place. And this is the problem. How do you provide for sufficient safeguards? If you look at things like abortion, there were a huge number of restrictions around abortion, and they have all been slowly relaxed, and now essentially abortion is within the time frame on demand, without any restriction. Palliative care may relieve suffering, and you hope it will, but isn't always available, and will not relieve the feelings of bigger burden, dependency, despair, lack of joy, no future, and depression. Those in favour of changing the law, Raymond Tallis, who is a physician, a philosopher, a poet, talks about the monstrous cruelty of walking away from somebody who is suffering unbearably. Nick Ross, again, an important host, he did Crime Watch, didn't he? He was on our College of Physicians ethical group, and the College of Physicians decided to be neutral about this, and he despaired of us. He said the case is fluorescently and conspicuously clear. We should continue to do what is in the patient's best interest and not what is in ours. To be neutral hardly covers us in ethical stardust. In other words, you're rubbish. George Carey, interestingly, ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, said, in fact, I support the legalization of assisted dying because of my religious beliefs, not in spite of them. And I know I'm far from alone. Our present Archbishop of Canterbury does not hold that view, nor does Helen Ann, who's in Newcastle. No. Desmond Tutu said, I pray that politicians, lawmakers, and religious leaders have the courage to support the choices terminally ill citizens make in departing Mother Earth with dignity and love. That's fine. He doesn't say who should help them, how people should be involved in, or whether people should be involved in helping them. Esther Ranson, we have all heard a lot about on the radio. If I reach she was diagnosed with lung cancer 3 years ago now. She was said to be terminal then, she's not really terminal. If I reach the stage where my life is unendurable, I would love my dearest and nearest to have the memory of my death being one I chose, peaceful, without pain. But if I go to Zurich, my family try to support me. They run the risk of being investigated for assisted suicide. This is not right, not ethical. It must change. That's what she said. Her daughter said I would want to ground her pain if she was going to Zurich. So she obviously wasn't so enthusiastic about it. This was interesting. Nicholas Dimbleby, a sculptor, and his brother Jonathan Dimbleby. Jonathan Dimbleby spoke of the increasingly unbearable suffering of his brother with motor neuron disease, although his brother made a very positive decision not to go to Dignitas. Interestingly, that he didn't view things so differently, but his brother wanted him to go to Dignitas. So those against. And we come here mainly about the slippery slope argument with regard to the law. Suffering, of course, isn't limited to the terminally ill, and so will assisted suicide or assisted dying be spread to the disabled, those feeling a little worth, the depressed. And in Canada, which I'll speak about in a moment, it's really gone quite wild. Assisted dying was legalized in 2016. 5 years later, it was extended to everyone with any chronic physical condition who wanted to die. And we'll talk about the Netherlands. Euthanasia is legal. That's the doctor killing the patient. I shouldn't use that phrase. The doctor injecting something that results in the patient's death. And it's legal if the patient is enduring unbearable suffering. In 2023, it was widened to include children, and a bill was drafted, not yet gone through, to give people aged 75 and over the option to have euthanasia if they felt they'd completed their life. So if you felt like that, you could ask for he's not in Holland. Okay. This is a super article which I would recommend anyone who feels interested in this to read. It's about what dignity, because this is about dignity in dying and what dignity means. And dignity is very much associated with choice. It is my choice to die. It is my choice to die when I want. And it contends that equating dignity with autonomy and choice creates a slope without philosophical breaks to halt our progress. Nothing is going to stop us going down the pound, it says. It's an interesting, quite a long article. And if we look at what's happened in Canada, when it set up 2015, there were all sorts of safeguards. They've all gone. Independent witnesses have gone. Capacity is no longer looked for. Reflection period is no longer looked for. Informed consent, okay, but not tested. Eligibility criteria, death reasonably foreseeable, just grievous and irremediable suffering is now the criteria. Independent assessors have gone. So all those safeguards have gone in Canada. And the real worry is that if this bill passes, that might well happen here. Once you say that choice is what matters, then choice should not just be limited to people who are in the last 6 months of life. And the last 6 months of life is very difficult as well. I mean, Megrahi, remember the Libyan bomber? He was released back to Libya because he had less than 6 months to live. 3 years later, he eventually died. So in Canada at the moment, there are a huge number. 5% of all deaths are medical assisted deaths in dying. And the numbers are going up and up. And in 2027, psychological reasons alone will be sufficient to request death. So if you're a 20-year-old, you're depressed, you can request assisted dying. When you think of the amount of effort we go to try and prevent people from committing suicide, and it's such an incredible change, isn't it, to allow people to kill themselves. And that's the situation in Holland at the moment. Hippocrates, we doctors say that we will not give a lethal drug to anyone if asked, nor will I advise such a plan. And that has been the situation for 2,500 years. And we're suddenly turning it all on its head. I find it quite concerning. This is Aurelia, the Netherlands. Some of you may have read about her. She's 29. She'd been very depressed. She drank poison supplied by her doctor and lay down to die. Her death was sanctioned by the state. She wasn't terminally ill. She was allowed to end her life on account of psychiatric illness. And if you get an opportunity, look up on Google. There's a very good YouTube video of her. She going around the crematorium 2 days before she dies. She says, I want to see where my body is going to be. She goes around the crematorium, and here she is sitting in the crematorium. She will be shortly lying there, and her family will all be there. And she reflects, it's so bizarre, she reflects how terrible it will be for her father to have to watch her body there. It is very puzzling, the whole thing. But anyway, she was given the poison, drank it, and died, and that is now common practice, not common, but it happens in the Netherlands. So, can sufficient safeguards ever be put in place? Some patients may have internal pressures. I have a duty not to be a burden. It's interesting, Leadbeater says that should be allowed. If you feel you're going to be a burden, that can be a factor in making you commit suicide, making you ask for assisted dying. Should doctors be involved at all? I mean, should the health service be involved? I mean, this is a legal issue, isn't it? Should it not just be the judiciary? Should not all this be done by solicitors rather than doctors? Because the doctors aren't doing anything, they're just providing a drug which you're going to take. So it is difficult. And of course it's expensive, this. There may be some savings by people not spending longer periods in palliative care, but it is expensive. The proposed Scottish bill does not allow for doctors to opt out. I mean, that's amazing, really. You can opt out of doing abortions, terminations. I think that will change if it goes through, but that was how it was initially set up. And not that many people have actually travelled to the UK to Dignitas, only about 30, 40 a year. And the double effect, which we'll come up to again in a moment, is it enables doctors giving drugs to relieve symptoms that may possibly, probably, inevitably reduce the time that patient has to live. But you're not giving the patient, you're not giving the drug to kill the patient. You're giving it because you care for the patient and want to relieve their symptoms. And yes, there may be financial pressures from the NHS to reduce the cost of palliative care, which may push the thing on. So who will use it? The well-off, the well-educated, those who are used to controlling everything in their lives, the Guardian readers, people like that. Who will be abused? Poor, ill-educated, the elderly, the infirm, those who have pose a burden on their relatives. And disability activists in the US are really strongly opposed to the measure because they fear they will be pressurized to take an early exit. And of course, suicide or death is not an end. What about those people left behind? People may feel quite guilty that they didn't stop their relative from seeking assisted dying. And these are some quotes Honora O'Neill, who's in the House of Lords, a philosopher. Legislation has to be framed to be safe for all. That's the difficulty with it. It has to be safe for everyone. This is a physician from Oregon, where it is legal. Assisted suicide is reversal of the proper role of a doctor as a healer, comforter, and consoler to an improper role of the physician killing a patient. And this is Pope Francis. Human compassion consists not in causing death, but in embracing the sick, in supporting them and in their difficulties, in offering them affection, attention, and the means to alleviate suffering. Bob George is a palliative care doctor in London, and he speaks very wisely on these things. A change in the law is a terrifying prospect to the vast majority of disabled people and those who are terminally ill. And he says, I'm not quite sure I get this, but the compelling logic is that once a person is allowed to end a life in that person's best interest, then anyone, as an equal before the law, is entitled to make a case for a death, causing a death, on the basis of the notion of best interest for that person. So if you think Aunt Sally, it's in her best interest if she leaves this world, you can legally allowed to do it on the basis of this law. And what is worse, not to kill people who want to live, or to kill people who, not to kill people who want to die, but to kill people who might want to live. And the Lord Chancellor also says that it's grave doubts about the possibility of drafting a law that would prevent abuses. The Catholic bishops, as you might believe, are against it. The act of assisted suicide violates the dignity inherent in every person's life, which is to be cherished and cared for all until natural death. Major problems in safeguarding the vulnerable and those without mental capacity when assisted suicide or euthanasia has been introduced in other jurisdictions, viz. Canada and Holland. The Church of England, this is a really important point. Brenda McCarthy says 500,000 elderly people are neglected or abused in the UK each year, often for financial reasons. It is naive to believe that some of these would not fall prey to pressure to end their lives prematurely if the law would change. And again, this constant feeling, what is worse, not to kill people who want to die, or to kill people who might want to live? And it is difficult. I reflect on why people stopped hanging people. They stopped hanging people because you could never be quite sure. And once they're hanged, it's irreversible, isn't it? You can't bring them back. And this is a little bit the same analogy here. You can never be quite sure whether that person might have wanted to live in a week's time or whether they were under pressure from their family to have assisted dying. Now Scotland, the Free Church of Scotland is urging everyone to pray for the bill, against the bill, for the protection of the elderly, the vulnerable and the disabled when it votes for assisted dying on Tuesday the 17th of March. It'll be very interesting what happens. If it requires 5 MSPs to change their mind or 9 to abstain for the vote to fail. And it's quite interesting. I watched a little bit of the debate, and it is on a bit of a knife edge, so we'll see what happens. If it does pass in Scotland, it's not the end of the day. It's not the end of the business, because they can decide that, but drugs are a UK responsibility. They're not just a Scottish responsibility. And the MHRSA, the drug licensing people, which is a UK-based thing, then have to decide to license the drug for killing people. Now, that's a big thing, because licensing a drug, you have to do controlled trials, you have to look for safety aspects. Well, how do you do controlled trials on a drug used for killing people? What side effects might they have? Well, it might kill them. Well, I mean, it does get a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? But that's what they'll have to do. The MHRSA will have to decide whether this drug is going to be legal or not for killing people. The British Geriatric Society makes some strong points that some people may feel subtly pressured to end their life earlier than they might otherwise have done. And what they really argue is that here's an opportunity for us as a country to offer better palliative care, end-of-life care, and improve the quality of aging better in our society so that we value older people more and don't just want to move them on. So current opinion, 80% the last time it was done said they were in favour of it, but a recent poll asked people to rank government priorities, and legal assisting dying was amongst the ones they gave as an example, and they came way down 11th, bottom, in the order of priorities. The doctrine of the double effect I touched on earlier is so important to consider in this argument. Pursuing a morally good action despite foreseeable side effects, including death, is ethical provided the bad side effects weren't the intended ones. So the usual example of that is giving morphine for pain relief is acceptable even if it hastens the patient's death. It's the sort of underlying intention, isn't it, that is important there. And active and passive euthanasia is another thing just to touch on. Withdrawal of ventilation, chemotherapy, dialysis is a passive move, not actively killing someone, but just remove the end result may be the same, but that is it's the intention that matters. Thou shalt not kill, but needs not strive officially to keep alive is often quoted in this respect, but of course that's totally satirical. This was Arthur Clough nonsensing the Victorian ethics that you walk by someone who's in the street, you don't kill them, but you don't do anything to help them, so they die. But that's fine because you haven't actively killed them. So he was looking at this from a very satirical point of view, but nevertheless, it is helpful, and we often quote that when people are having endless operations, surgery, chemotherapy, and so on. Right, I've finished, I think. Let me just finish with this wonderful Dylan Thomas quote. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the night. Best said with a proper accent, but there we are. So that's all I've got to say. I really welcome comments, feelings, what people think about it.
Peter, thank you so much, and for the clarity of that. And of course, it is important, isn't it, to say that there isn't, God's view and the wrong view. You can be a Christian and have different views. It's just when I see Desmond Tutu on one side and George Carey on the other, two people I greatly respect, we have to say it is debatable. But I think you've given a very clear nudge to us, and it'd be very interesting to see what people say. Would you just like to have just a chat at your own tables just for a moment, just for instant responses to what Peter has presented to us, and whether what Peter said has in any sense nudged you in a different direction? Just a couple of minutes of chat at your own table. Okay, given that we've not got very long, let's just see what questions and comments might come from any quarter. So do please just speak up. That would be all I'd say, unless actually perhaps, Lorna, do you think you could get the roving mic? Yeah. Thank you. Oh. Well, no, you may be asked a question, Peter. So don't go away. It just leaves me here. Yes. I think I'm right in saying that in Scotland, with the vote coming up in a couple of days' time, that the professional associations of both psychiatrists and physicians, I think, have both moved from a neutral to against, on the grounds that the safeguards are just not sufficient. I think that's right, isn't it, Peter? In Scotland just recently. Anyway, comments, please, questions.
Well, thank you for the very, very helpful presentation. And one of the things that surprised me was I'd heard Netherlands perhaps had not as strong defence safeguards, but that is very scary, the lack of safeguards in Netherlands. Is there a strong kind of opposition there to this? Or?
People see it as a sort of helter-skelter of down the sort of moral pathway. It's, but there isn't. It's been accepted.
Yeah. You can't find it. Okay. Right. Well, we'll try the loud voice, Jennifer.
I think the protection for the giving pain relief is really important, because sometimes that last dose is the dose needed to relieve the pain, but it will also perhaps bring on the death. Now, if you've got nursing staff who don't understand that double protection, then you may have them reporting somebody for having caused the death, when in fact what they've done is alleviate pain. And I think that question of the double process is important to be
Yeah.
very clearly recognised.
I think that's right. And our friend who killed all those people, Shipman, our friend Shipman, has done, he did a huge amount of harm, but that is the biggest harm he's done. He's made it much more difficult for people to be free in use of morphine.
I think having had a disabled son who actually died in a year or a day, I think there'd be a lot of pressure put on parents to go that way, basically, if it's so lax, pressured to go down that route.
That's really interesting you say that, because I think that's what really worries people, because you can't have a law that's just for Esther Ranson. You have to have a law for everyone, don't you? And that includes disabled people.
Yes, and of course yeah. But to my mic, we'll use Peter. You keep yours. And the problem we have with me repeating the question is that if I look at you with a bewildered face on, it's because in 2 days' time I should be having wax removal. But in the meantime, I've got oil put in my ears, which is completely finishing me off. So I'm not able to repeat your questions, I'm afraid. But I will come round with this. And that's the way to do it. Thank you.
It was interesting with Mark, who spent most of his time in hospital, the amount of good he did in that 12 months. People saw him as a person, and we were supported mightily by the church. And I can't say, it was very sad, and to me, I believe he's in the right place. But to not have gone through that, we wouldn't have learnt to rely on the Lord. we wouldn't have learnt to have commitment to other people in the same position. And a lot of good has come out of it.
Thank you. Thank you. That's another important point, that can be a dignity in dying, and there can be there can be a stature in waiting for death. Martin.
Peter, you mentioned Esther Ranson, and she talked about something which I think really struck a chord with society as a whole. She talked about something like, we all know, she said, that doctors administer, morphine or whatever it is to bring a life to an end. We all know that doctors make that decision. And people seem to accept what she said. There seems to be this perception in society that this already happens on supposedly the whim of doctors. And, clearly it doesn't. But there is this perception, is there not?
Possibly. I mean, it certainly applies to George V. But I don't think people sort of help people on their way. I mean, there was a time when disabled babies were, quietly put to one side. But I think society's moved on from that in that way, that we're much more hesitant to do that. But then this is going the other way, that we're wanting the law to legalise it all, really.
Lorna, well, actually, can I just go in front of you first, please? Please.
Thank you. I would like to ask you the definition of the word capacitance. Capacity.
Indeed.
Of a person. We had an experience just before Christmas where a relative of ours was being, it was a time when hospitals were filling up with new diagnosis of the flu. That was the case, wasn't it? Yes. It was the flu. And the hospital assured me that there was no coercion for the patients to be discharged early. There was no doubt at all he would be staying, this relative of ours, till over Christmas. 3 days before, he had a very, very scant interview with some untrained people, and they said he had capacity. And with that, he was discharged.
I think that's a very good point, and that's the sort of thing one worries about, that there will be a box. Capacity, yes, no. Yes, because I need to go home, it's a bit late, and answer a few questions, and that's it.
Yes, we thought
he was doing the survey. He didn't understand at all that he was being interviewed.
Right.
Just a quick one that might turn into a long one. How was it that all the safeguards in Canada were not just failed but completely removed?
I think because the argument was that it was about choice. And if you have choice, then you can have assisted dying. So you had choice if you were terminally ill. But then you can't stop at terminally ill. If you have choice, you can add in depression or just ill or tired of life and all those other things. I think it was choice, and that's where the dignity bit comes in, that choice and dignity were associated. And I think that's been the problem there. That's why it all has gone AWOL.
It might interest people to know that George Carey changed his mind about the assisted dying bill. He was against it to begin with, but then he became in favour after he actually witnessed somebody dying in the most appalling pain and suffering, and it moved him so much that he did change his mind.
Okay, I don't know.
As far as I can see, our bill, as proposed, has plenty of safeguards. What's happening in Canada and the Netherlands is not good at all. It is a slippery slope. But our bill is saying completely this is for people who are going to be terminally ill, haven't got very much longer to live, are probably facing a pretty gruesome death, and therefore should have the choice to decide when they're going to face their death. Expecting people to suffer for no good reason, I think, is very inhumane and cruel. But if you're in that position yourself, and it's persons who've got a choice, they may apply for assisted dying, but they can still change their mind if they wish. There's nothing to say you've got to do it once you've set the ball rolling, as it were. The choice is always with the patient. So the other things that are happening in other countries are the other countries, and they are worrying and they're scary, I agree. And I understand all the worries that people have about disabled people, vulnerable people, very elderly people. We have to really make sure that they're not, compromised in any way. But for people who are genuinely ill, are generally facing a death which is not going to be good in the least, and choose to go before that happens, and while they can enjoy their family and their friends, and while their family and friends can remember them in a good way rather than remember them as suffering terribly. I have never been in that. I've seen people dying of cancer in very appalling circumstances. Palliative care doesn't cover everything. It doesn't relieve all suffering. It doesn't relieve all terrible pain. It relieves a lot, and it relieves some, but it doesn't relieve everything. And I think for those people, they really need to be given the choice.
Thank you, Fiona. That makes a strong case in that direction as well. And it certainly has a very great emotional strength, doesn't it, when you encounter people who you love and who are going through awful pain. So I can see it's really, really hard. That figure of 80% of the population that support a form of assisted dying is one that's ultimately is going to be quite hard to resist, I think. But whether we agree with that and vote with it is another issue. Last point from Pauline. I'm about to give her the floor.
Thanks. I just wonder, and it was touched on, what happens to the relatives left behind and how they feel and all the repercussions, because the repercussions of not every but some suicides can be fairly devastating for those left behind, and depending on the stage that the person chose to end their life, again, I just wonder what the repercussions would be for those left.
Peter, any comment?
No, I think that's very true. And going back to Fiona's point, I entirely agree with everything you say, but that's how the law started in Canada, with all these restrictions. And because unless the law is drafted in such a way that it can't be changed, then once you put choice as the main argument behind it, then it will change.
And my law degree told me that Parliament can't bind its successors. So it can always change, and that's the danger. But the emotional appeal is strong. Very difficult arguments. Thank you for that, those contributions in questions and comments. But above all, thank you, Peter, for making that very clear and putting the work into making that so for us. Thank you ever so much. Could we, thanks very much. If we could just give out the